Welcome to the Courage in Flight Show, or Courage TV. Courage TV celebrates everyday people who have taken courageous steps in their lives. Our hope is to inspire you to live a powerful and courageous life. I'm your host, Dr. Tao Do, a communication coach for high-performance entrepreneurs and professionals. You can learn more about me at taocoach.com. And today we have a special guest. She is an accredited speaker with Toastmasters International. She is also a conflict resolution and diversity and inclusion leadership coach. Tamara Hamilton is going to give a speech on building bridges across differences. Let's welcome Tamara Hamilton.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Today I just want to have a conversation with you. Just a small talk about building bridges across differences. It seems that's been my entire life's work. I'm from South Central Los Angeles, and in my life, I have seen the 60s, the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement, and now the complexity of the world that we're living in today. I just have three things that I want you to take away today. And that is, building bridges is the responsibility of each and every one of us. It doesn't matter if you're a little second grader like my grandson, or you're a college student, or a senior citizen, a business owner, a religious leader, a teacher, an educator. It's our responsibility to build bridges across differences. You might ask, why is that important? It's important because we love the world that we live in. We love this planet. We like to travel without fear. We like to meet people in the market. We like to shake hands when we meet a stranger. Building bridges is such an important thing to do. And the 3 points that I want to make is that we have to be bold about it. To be bold, we want to be intentional, and we want to be genuine. I came up with the acronym of just be big. Be big. Be bold, be intentional, and be genuine. I can give you examples of each one. Now, I was introduced as a conflict resolution and diversity leadership coach. When you put all of that together, it might sound a little bit complex, like, well, what does she really do? I build bridges. I help people to build bridges. I nurture the people who are trying to build bridges, whether it's in their communities, or in the workplace, or in the church. Let me give you some examples around building bridges. When I was a little girl, my family migrated from Montgomery, Alabama. Now, Montgomery has been in the news a lot lately, the state of Alabama. Well, that's where I was born. And when I came along, African Americans had a certain place they had to be under what we called then the Jim Crow era. When my father saw that my opportunities would be limited, he wanted to build a bridge from Alabama to Los Angeles. And so one night, they hatched a plan, or launched a plan, and we moved to Los Angeles, California. And that's where he encouraged me to build bridges even further. The bridges that my father wanted me to build were important because he said, you know, little girl, I want you to become a citizen of the world. A citizen of the world, that seemed really, really big. But then the opportunities that were put in my path made that possible. The boldness came in putting me in a school that was very diverse, even in 1970. 1967 is when I entered high school. And I entered Washington Preparatory High School, where there was lots of diversity. So I met the kids from Venice Beach. I met the kids from Beverly Hills. I met kids from everywhere. And together we built bridges in the 60s because the cities were burning. Even then we had racial turmoil. Well, while the cities were burning, a group of adults said, you students, get together. Go up here on this mountain, the Ottawa Mountains. to a special camp called Brotherhood Anytown. Spend a week building bridges to each other so that maybe you could build them to the world. That was a very bold move. And the intention was getting up every morning and saying, how can I make a new friend today? How can I meet someone along the way that I can help and at the same time can help me? So my intention always was, how can I get on a path to become that citizen of the world? The genuine part came from looking around my world, around my community of Watts, California, and trying to figure out, how can I make it better? It was so genuine to me because people came to help me. I was able to work in the Bobby Kennedy presidential campaign. Wow, that was a bridge, because here I am in South Central Los Angeles still having my sights set on becoming a citizen of the world. One thing my father taught me was that a dream without a plan is just a wish. So I had to make sure that I had a plan to build bridges, just like now. I went to Scripps College, I went to the University of Southern California and to Howard University. And each step along the way was another plank in that bridge. The bridges that I built for myself academically were around race relations, gender studies, class, power, resiliency. I became a college professor again so that I could help students build bridges to one another. And by the time I reach this season of my life, I find myself as a diversity and inclusion coach. I go into organizations who are trying to figure out, how can we have relationships in our workplace that are what? Bold, intentional, and genuine. We spend so much time at work that it's important for us to build bridges across differences. There are rewards there. We can learn how different people think. We can learn about different cultures. And if you're real lucky, you get some good food along the way. You can learn about the tastes and the smells and the essence of different flavors, not just of food, but of people. I enjoy the work that I do because as a diversity and leadership coach, I get to go into so many different places where people are hurting. People just don't understand each other. There's a conflict here, there's a conflict there, there's a conflict over here. And when people are in conflict, what do? They fold their arms, they lock their arms, and they say, I'm not dealing with her. Or you know what? I don't like what he said to me in the meeting. But sometimes it's not about the content of what was said, how it was said. It's because we don't know each other's story. So when I talk about building bridges across differences, you heard a little bit of my story. And I would ask you, what's your story? What is a unique story that you have to share with the world? What is a story that you could tell? And if people listen, they would have a fuller view of who you are. From your values and your beliefs, how you celebrate sacred holidays, how you like to party. So many things come when we tell our stories to one another. But to do that, we have to have those three things that I mentioned at the beginning. We have to be bold. What does bold mean? It means stepping up. How are you? What's your name? What lovely accent am I hearing? Knowing how to talk to people, that's the key. And I have now dedicated my life's work to building bridges across differences. I have traveled to Africa, Japan, Korea. I lived in Germany for 7 years so that I could understand, how does it feel to be an immigrant who doesn't know the language? I did that for 7 years because I was bold, I was intentional, and I was very genuine of trying to learn the culture and the history and the ambiance of the German people. What did I gain from that? Wie geht's? I learned a new language. I learned a new culture. I now have friends from all over the world. because I thought, how can I build a bridge to fulfill the dream that my father had for me, which is to become a citizen of the world. We are a global community. We're not a melting pot, we're a tossed salad of differences. And if we would just come to the table and lay it out for the world to see, we will find that building bridges across differences is not that hard. You just have to share your story. Once upon a time, everybody loves a story. I encourage all of you, think about what is your authentic story? How can you tell it in such a way that it will cause a bridge to be built between you and another person who's very different from you? You'll find that it is a rewarding experience.
If you are just tuning in, I'm here with Tamara Hamilton. She is an accredited speaker with Toastmasters International and a diversity and inclusion coach. Thanks for joining us, Tamara.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah. So Tamara, why is diversity and inclusion an important topic in today's society?
It's everywhere. Even the smallest town, the biggest city, the little club, the Quilters Guild, anywhere you look, people are talking about diversity and inclusion. It's important because our world has gotten smaller. With social media, with the ease of air travel, cruises, we can get to places in records amount of time. And people are moving into different countries, different communities, and we need to know each other. We need to know each other and we need to get along with each other. So diversity and inclusion, it's important for our survival, and for our growth and development as human beings.
And you chose this as your profession, right? You're a diversity coach?
I think it chose me.
Yeah?
I grew up during the Civil Rights Movement. I grew up during the 60s. I was a Black Studies major. I started off being very curious after the Watts riots of 1965. Why did people have conflict, especially around differences? And it became an academics pursuit for me. And then I spent 20 years at the National Education Association.
Wow.
And they knew I had this skill and this academic expertise. So I began to write training programs around diversity. During that time, we called it multiculturalism. I was on committees in high school around multiculturalism. I attended the first multicultural conference for high school students in 1968 at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. So it's been with me all my life. So I can't run from it. We just sort of met in the middle. In the last 10 years or so, I've been very active as a profession.
Wow. And this is a topic that's really deeply important to you in your life.
It is important to me. I have 3 sons, I have grandchildren, I have friends from all walks of life, and I'd like to think that the contribution that I'm making in the world is to foster greater understanding, to encourage people to travel to different lands. I went to Rwanda over the holidays with a very diverse group of students from George Mason. I'm going to Cambodia in December with another group of students from George Mason. And I spent my senior year in Ghana, West Africa. I lived in Germany for 7 years voluntarily, not associated with the military, but wanting to know, what does it feel like to move to a new country, not know the language, and then be able to flourish in that country? So it's been an experience, an experiential way of living for me.
Yeah, and you certainly walk the talk.
Yes.
Right? Yes. So let me ask you this. When you encounter someone who's different from you and you sense that there's conflict brewing, what is the strategy or the mindset on how to interact with that?
Well, when I meet someone different, I'm always interested in your story. What's your story? I find that most people, their favorite subject is themselves.
Right.
They like to talk about themselves. So when I meet you, I don't allow conflict to even hit the table because I'm meeting you with my heart. And I'm really, truly interested in your story. And then I share my story. And guess what? we start to see that we have some connections that we would have never thought possible. Now, in my profession, I'm called into organizations where conflict has hit the table across differences. And that's where my personal life experience, my academic training, all of the certifications that I have acquired, whether it's in human relations or leadership coaching or organization development or communications, they all integrate in order for me to come up with a way to enter an organization and help the parties who are in conflict be able to have a civil conversation. They don't have to be friends in the end, but they need to know how to respect one another and how to communicate.
Now, I make up that sometimes conflicts happen because of fear, right? They feel, people feel threatened because there's differences. And is that the case that you notice?
I think right now in our country in particular, I can't really speak for other places, but I know where we're living right now, there are some people who fear differences. And sometimes the fear is based on myth. Sometimes it's based on a past encounter. You know, the amygdala is at the base of our brain, and that's where all of our emotional memory is stored. So if I met you and you look like someone who I had a bad encounter with, I might treat you differently, not even knowing that I'm doing that. And that's what we mean when we talk about unconscious bias. Because there's an experience that's not favorable to me, and the person looks like you. And I don't mean exactly like you, but she could be from your ethnic orientation. It's also with gender. We can meet people where we've had an experience that's negative, and then we don't know why we're treating that person differently, but we do.
So it seems like the first step is to recognize that there's this unconscious bias, and then to resolve that bias within ourselves.
Well, bring it to awareness.
Okay.
Bring it to awareness, because we all have unconscious bias. I have some. We all have it. But what we need to do is help people understand the science behind it, that you're not a bad person because you may not want to associate with a particular group of people. It just may mean you need more exposure, more information, and to understand yourself and ask yourself questions as to why you have the feelings that you do. And that's part of my job. I help people bring awareness to their own truth, and then I help people to understand, where might I have something in common with this person? Or what if we actually work together and 1 + 1 could equal 3? Your good idea, my good idea equals a better idea. That's why we want diversity in the workplace. We need the best of everyone's thinking, because based on someone's cultural background and experience, they'll have a different worldview. But the problems that are facing us right now, they're big. They're bigger than any of the problems that we had anticipated 20, 30, 40 years ago. And so we need a new mindset.
So what strategy do you have? So say you're called into an organization and the people who's involved are in really hard conflict. How do you help and support them to have a civil conversation with each other?
Well, the first thing I do, leaning on my skills in mediation, talk to each person separately.
Okay.
That way you gain some trust, some sense of credibility, because they have to figure out, well, who is she? Why is she coming in here getting all in my drama? I have to let them know who I am. I have to build trust. I have to help them feel that whatever conversations we're having are confidential. And I get to the story. What's your story? What is the story of this conflict? Who are the players here? Because sometimes when two people are in conflict, it's not about the two people. It's the system. And sometimes that means I have to go beyond the two people and talk to other people in the organization. Sometimes people become victims of each other because they're working in close proximity. They may not have been formally introduced to one another. I may not know the gifts that you have, and you don't know the gifts that I have. And so we clash until we realize there's some mutual benefit in us working together.
That's amazing. Yeah, that sounds like it would be really powerful important work.
Well, it is, and I'll tell you another thing about it too. I have a philosophy that no one gets up in the morning and say, "Oh, how can I go to work and make Tao's life miserable?" It just happens.
Right.
But I think that at the baseline of everybody, there is some good, and we just have to spend the time to find the good in each person that we meet.
Do you have any advice or strategy on how people can interact in this new world that is much smaller now, more diverse? Everyone is intermingling.
Yes. I grew up as an English teacher, as a literature major. And one of the reasons I think I have such a global view of the world is I went to stories. I keep talking about stories, our own personal stories, but I would read if I met someone from Nigeria, because I had read Chinua Achebe, Things Fall Apart, No Longer at Ease, then I could say, "Have you read Chinua Achebe?" And the person would say, "Oh, you know Chinua Achebe?" "Yes, I've read his books." Now it's not about how we're different. There's that commonality that's built. I've read Vietnamese literature. I've read literature from the Middle East. I've read Hispanic literature. I remember one day I was talking to someone from our southwest part of the United States, and I remember one of the required texts from one of the courses in the university when I was teaching at Occidental College was Bless Me Ultima.
Oh.
So when I said, "Have you read Bless Me Ultima?" it was like, yes. It makes people feel validated that you take the time to learn something about their culture, their food, their literature, their history. So when someone approaches me and they may say, "Well, have you read Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison?" I'm like, "Whoa, yeah, how do you know about Ralph Ellison?" "Oh, I read it in school." Now there's a place to start. Other times it might be around food or recipes, but the one unifier today is music.
Right.
So when if I'm going to Cuba, which I hope to do, I'm going to study Cuban music and dance and history. If I'm going to France, I'm going to study music, dance, literature, culture.
Yeah, so your strategy is to just get really immersed.
Yes.
And really
yes,
understand
yes.
all the world cultures so that
That's
whoever
right.
you meet, you can interact with them.
Yes, because whenever I know I have an opportunity to travel, the first thing I'm doing is I'm going to the library.
Oh, interesting. So you keep yourself really well educated.
I try, because it's just the whole world is a university to me. I'm still in school, by the way.
Yeah.
I went back to school at George Mason University in the School of Conflict Analysis and Resolution.
Wow.
I went back to school at 65 years old.
Wow.
That
Good
way,
for you.
yes,
You're
that
a lifelong learner.
Yes, but also I could begin to speak the language of the millennials.
Oh, yes. We have a new lingo now.
That is a generation that we need to pay attention to, because this generation of millennials, they are the most diverse demographic that we'll have. And they're going to be running the show one day. And another thing, babies who are 3 years old right now is the first tipping point that most of those babies are babies of color. So what does that tell you about our future? If you look at the millennials being the most diverse demographically, you look at babies now, 3-year-old babies who are in the world today and babies being born now, majority are babies of color, which means we have to understand our differences for the future prosperity of all.
Yeah, and connect everyone together.
Yes, so that everybody will have a chance to succeed.
Now, as the world continue to move and change, there's going to be moments where some people are more comfortable than others. There's going to be fears that's come up. And how do you have any advice on how you can become courageous and overcome these fear and step bravely into the arena?
Yes, I think the first thing is you have to name the fear. And if you can't name the fear, then lean on others who can help you, whether it's friends or family. But sometimes it's a diversity coach like me that you engage. And I do a lot of pro bono work. All of my work is not for a fee. I do pro bono work because I understand that what I'm doing is more than a profession. It's really a calling. I'm really trying to help the planet heal from racial divide, class struggles, gender discrimination, sexual orientation discrimination. And so if I were to charge everything that I did, it would limit my scope. And that's one of the reasons I became a public speaker and an accredited speaker with Toastmasters International, because it gives me a platform to bring this message of peace and healing and reconciliation.
Wow, so you're very mission driven.
I am very mission driven.
Yeah, and you move from a heart space.
I do.
And that's what I like about you.
Yes, I move from a heart space because I've learned recently that the heart sends more messages to the body than the brain does. And the heart radiates the energy 3 feet around us. So the messages of love, hope, reconciliation, if we're living through that, 3 feet around us, it's like a magnet. And that's why people can come into your space and feel good about you, because the heart is speaking.
Wow, so how can people find out more about you and get in touch with you?
I would love for people to go to my website. Thank you. It's www.tamara, T-A-M-A-R-A-S, Hamilton.com. And then you can sign up for my free download, which is called 7 Blocks to Building Bridges, where I go into detail about some of the questions you asked, like, how can you do it? Well, there are 7 steps there. And I have a blog there, and they can sign up for the newsletter and stay in touch.
Wow, thanks for being here with us,
Thank you so much. I enjoyed this.
Oh, that was great. And thank you so much for tuning in to the Courage in Flight show. I'm your host, Dr. Thao Do, a communication coach for high-performance entrepreneurs and professionals. You can learn more about me at taocoach.com. Keep living a powerful and courageous life.